I always thought I had everything under control. That's what I do for a living, after all. Control systems, keeping things balanced, solving problems with cold, hard logic. I figured I could apply the same principles to my marriage with Laura. For years it seemed to work. I was the steady rock, she was the ambitious go-getter. I kept our home life stable while she climbed the corporate ladder, but lately something felt off. The gauges were fluctuating, so to speak. Laura was spending more and more time at the office. When she was home, she was distracted, always on her phone. I told myself it was just work stress. No need to jump to conclusions or let emotions cloud my judgment. That's not how I operate. I'd watch her rush out the door each morning, perfectly put together in her designer suits. She'd barely have time for a quick goodbye kiss. In the evenings, she'd come home late, exhausted but somehow energized. I'd have dinner waiting, but more often than not, she'd already eaten. Just a working dinner with the team, she'd say. Big project coming up. I nodded, filed away the information. No alarms going off yet. Just data points to monitor. I noticed the changes slowly at first. Laura's late nights at work became more frequent, her excuses about working dinners piling up like data points in my mind. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my engineering brain couldn't help but analyze the patterns. One night, as I sat at the kitchen table reviewing some schematics, Laura breezed in well past dinner time. Her perfume, stronger than usual, hit me before she did. Sorry, honey. Another late meeting with Greg and the team. I nodded, not looking up from my work. There's leftovers in the fridge, if you want them. She hesitated for a moment, then moved to the refrigerator. I heard her rummaging around, the clink of containers, but no microwave. When I glanced up, she was already heading upstairs, phone in hand. I tried to focus on my blueprints, but my mind kept circling back to Laura's behavior. The late nights, the constant texting, the new clothes she'd been buying for work. It all added up to something, but I wasn't ready to face what that something might be. Over the next few weeks, I found myself pulling back. When Laura tried to engage me in conversation, my responses became shorter, more clinical. I treated our interactions like I would a malfunctioning system at work. Observe, document, wait for more data before diagnosing the problem. One evening, as I was helping Sophie with her homework, she looked up at me with those perceptive blue eyes of hers. Dad, why is Mom always with Greg? I felt my jaw clench involuntarily. It's just work, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups have to spend a lot of time with their co-workers. Sophie frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer, but she laughs different when she talks to him on the phone, and she's always dressing up fancy for work now. I ruffled her hair, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm sure it's nothing. Soph, let's focus on this math problem. Okay. But inside, Sophie's observations had solidified my suspicions. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Still, I kept my emotions in check, my responses to Laura becoming even colder and more distant. I wasn't going to confront her without concrete evidence. That's not how I operate. I needed more data, more proof before I could even consider the possibility that my wife was having an affair. I buried myself in my work, trying to drown out the nagging doubts about Laura. The control room at the plant became my sanctuary, a place where everything made sense. Equations, schematics, and data streams, they were reliable, predictable, unlike my marriage. Every late night Laura spent at the office felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. I catalogued each one mentally, building a database of suspicion. Tuesday, working dinner. Thursday, urgent project. Saturday, weekend strategy session. The excuses piled up, each one less believable than the last. At home, I retreated into myself. Our conversations became stilted, functional exchanges about household logistics and Sophie's schedule. When Laura reached for my hand one evening, I flinched involuntarily. The hurt in her eyes was palpable, but I couldn't bring myself to care. My touch, once loving, now felt mechanical when I forced myself to reciprocate. I threw myself into a particularly complex optimization project at work. The long hours were a welcome distraction from the chaos at home. My coworkers noticed the change, commenting on my increased focus and productivity. If only they knew the real reason behind it. One night, as I pored over system diagrams late into the evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Laura. Working late again. You don't wait up, I stared at the screen, a familiar hollowness settling in my chest. Without replying, I turned back to my work. At least here, in this world of logic and predictability, I was still in control. I sat at my desk in the control room, staring blankly at the monitors. The weekend was here, but instead of feeling relief, I felt a heavy weight in my chest. Sophie was off to her grandparents, and Laura was at a conference. The words left a bitter taste in my mouth. I rubbed my eyes, trying to focus on the critical project in front of me. It was a welcome distraction from the turmoil at home. The familiar hum of machinery and the steady stream of data on my screens provided a sense of order that my personal life sorely lacked. My phone buzzed. A text from Laura. Hope the project's going well. Sophie settled in with Mom and Dad. Talk soon. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. What was I supposed to say? Thanks for the update. I hope you're having a great time at your conference. In the end, I just put the phone down without responding. It was easier that way. The hours ticked by as I immersed myself in work. The complex algorithms and intricate systems were a comfort. They made sense. They followed rules. I shook my head, forcing those thoughts away. I needed to stay focused. It was late Sunday afternoon when I finally wrapped up the project. I stretched, feeling the satisfying pop of my joints after hours of sitting. The plant was quiet. Most of the staff gone for the weekend. I gathered my things, ready to head home to an empty house. As I drove, I found myself taking the long way home. I wasn't in any hurry to return to the silence, to the emptiness that seemed to have taken up residence in our home lately. The streets were quiet, families likely enjoying their Sunday dinners together. The thought made my chest ache. I pulled into our driveway, noticing the neighbors' curious glance. They were probably wondering why I was coming home so late. Why Laura's car wasn't in the driveway. I ignored their looks and headed inside. The house was dark and still. I flipped on the lights, the sudden brightness almost painful. I moved through the rooms, turning on more lights as I went. Anything to chase away the shadows, the loneliness. I made my way to the kitchen, opening the fridge out of habit more than hunger. The shelves were sparse. I hadn't had the energy to do a proper grocery run lately. I settled for a beer and some leftover pizza, carrying them to the living room. As I sat on the couch, my eyes fell on the family photo on the mantel. It was from our last vacation, before things started to change. We all looked so happy, so connected. Sophie was grinning widely, ice cream smeared on her cheek. Laura had her arm around me, her smile radiant. And me. I looked content, at peace. I turned away from the photo, unable to bear the sight of what we used to be. I focused on my cold pizza instead, forcing myself to eat even though I had no appetite. The house felt too big, too empty without Sophie's laughter, or even the tense silence that had become the norm between Laura and me. I found myself missing Max, our loyal dog who had gone with Sophie to her grandparents. His steady presence would have been a comfort right now. I finished my beer and considered having another. But no. I needed to keep a clear head. I had work tomorrow, and I couldn't afford to let my personal life affect my performance. I was nothing if not professional. I cleaned up and headed upstairs, pausing outside Sophie's room. I pushed the door open, looking at her tidy space. Her stuffed animals were arranged neatly on her bed, her books stacked on her desk. I smiled sadly, remembering how she used to beg me to read her just one more story before bed. I closed the door gently and continued to our bedroom. Our bedroom. The phrase felt wrong somehow. I changed quickly and slipped into bed, acutely aware of the empty space beside me. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't quiet. What was Laura really doing? Was I just being paranoid? But deep down I knew. The signs were all there, clear as day to my analytical mind. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke with a start to the sound of the front door opening. I glanced at the clock. 2:37 a.m. My heart raced as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Laura appeared in the doorway, looking disheveled and guilty. "Jake," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I thought you'd be asleep." I sat up, my voice cold. "Conference run late." She hesitated, and in that moment I saw the truth written all over her face. But still she lied. "Yes, the last session went overtime. I decided to drive back tonight instead of waiting till morning." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I lay back down, turning my back to her. I heard her sigh, then the rustle of clothes as she changed. The bed dipped as she got in, but she didn't reach for me. We lay there, inches apart, but separated by an ocean of unspoken words and broken trust. Morning came too soon. I got up before Laura, showering and dressing in silence. She stirred as I was about to leave the room. "Jake," her voice was soft, uncertain. I paused at the door but didn't turn around. "Yes." "I nothing. Have a good day at work." I left without another word. The day dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. I threw myself into my work, double-checking calculations that I knew were correct, running diagnostics that didn't need to be run, anything to keep my mind occupied. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see Laura's name. Instead, it was my mother-in-law. Frowning, I answered. "Hello? Jake, dear. I'm so sorry to bother you at work, but I wanted to let you know we're bringing Sophie home early. My arthritis is acting up something fierce, and we thought it best to cut the visit short." I blinked, processing this information. "Oh, I see. When will you be arriving?" "We should be there in about an hour." "Is Laura home?" I hesitated. "She's at work, but I can leave early to meet you." "Oh no, don't trouble yourself. We have a key. Remember, we'll just let ourselves in and get Sophie settled. You take care now." Before I could protest, she had hung up. I stared at my phone, a knot forming in my stomach. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I tried calling Laura, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent her a quick text. "Sophie coming home early. Your parents dropping her off soon." No response. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of anxiety and dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As soon as my shift ended, I rushed home, my heart pounding in my chest. I pulled into the driveway, noticing Laura's car parked haphazardly, as if she had been in a hurry. The house was quiet as I entered, too quiet. "Sophie," I called out. "Laura." No answer. I climbed the stairs, my feet feeling like lead. As I reached the top, I saw Sophie sitting on the floor outside our bedroom. Her arms wrapped around Max, her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. "Sophie," I said softly, approaching her. "What's wrong, kiddo?" She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I saw Mom, she was with Greg." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I steadied myself against the wall, trying to process what Sophie had just said, but deep down I knew. I had known all along. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling beside her. Sophie's words came out in a rush, describing how she had come home early, heard voices, and walked in on Laura and Greg in our bedroom. As she spoke, I felt a cold rage building inside me, tempered only by the need to comfort my daughter. I pulled Sophie into my arms, holding her tight as she finally broke down, sobbing into my shirt. Max whined softly, pressing against us. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Sophie hiccuped between sobs. "I didn't want to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." I stroked her hair, my heart breaking for her. "You did the right thing, Sophie. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." We sat there on the floor, father and daughter united in our pain, as the last remnants of our family crumbled around us. I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers drumming a steady rhythm on the wood. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Each second that passed felt like an eternity as I waited for Laura to come home. The front door creaked open, and I heard her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She entered the kitchen, her eyes widening when she saw me sitting there. "Jake, you're still up?" Her voice wavered slightly. I didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sophie saw you," I said, my voice as cold as ice. Laura froze, the color draining from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, struggling to find words. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't," I cut her off sharply. "Don't lie to me anymore." She took a step towards me, her hands outstretched. "Jake, please, let me explain." "I don't care what you have to say," I interrupted, my eyes never leaving hers. "It's over. Pack your things and leave." Laura's face crumpled. "Jake, no, we can work this out." "It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I laughed humorlessly. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. This was a choice. You chose to betray our family." Tears welled up in her eyes. "What about Sophie? We can't do this to her." "You already did this to her," I replied, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "She saw you with him." "Laura in our bedroom." Laura gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. I stood up, pushing my chair back. "I've already called a lawyer. We'll sort out the details later. For now, I want you out of this house." "Jake, please," Laura begged, reaching for my arm. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Don't," I warned. "Just go." I watched as she stumbled out of the kitchen, her sobs echoing through the house. I remained standing there, my hands clenched at my sides, as I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, the opening and closing of drawers, the zipping of bags. When she came back down, her eyes were red and puffy. She paused at the kitchen doorway, looking at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond. I just watched as she walked out the front door, closing it softly behind her. Only then did I allow myself to sink back into the chair, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I stood by the front door, watching Laura's car disappear into the night. The taillights faded, taking with them years of memories, both good and bad. I expected to feel a crushing weight of sadness, but instead a sense of relief washed over me. The broken system was finally shutting down. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a long breath. The house felt different already, quieter, but also lighter somehow. I climbed the stairs, my work boots heavy on each step. As I reached Sophie's room, I paused, listening. No sound came from inside, not even Max's usual shuffling. I knocked gently. "Sophie, can I come in?" No answer. I slowly opened the door, finding Sophie curled up on a bed, Max pressed against her side. Her eyes were open, staring blankly at the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb them. "She's gone," I said softly, not sure what else to say. Sophie nodded slightly, her fingers absently stroking Max's fur. We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the steady rhythm of Max's breathing. Dad, Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah, kiddo. Is it my fault?" My heart clenched. I turned to face her fully, placing my hand on her shoulder. "No, Sophie. Absolutely not. This is between your mom and me. You did nothing wrong." She nodded again, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I wished I had the right words to make it all better, to erase the pain and confusion. But I was an engineer, not a poet. I dealt in facts and systems, not emotions. "Listen," I said, trying to find the right approach. "So think of it like one of those science experiments we do. Sometimes, no matter how carefully you set things up, they don't work out the way you expect. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means you need to try a different approach." Sophie looked at me then, a hint of understanding in her eyes. "So, we're going to try a different approach now." I nodded, feeling a small spark of hope. "That's right. It might take some time to figure out, but we'll do it together." "Okay." "Okay," she whispered, sitting up to hug me tightly. As I held her, I realized that this was the first step in rebuilding our system. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be plenty of troubleshooting ahead. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were on the right track. I sat in the backyard with Sophie, watching Max chase a butterfly. The past few days had been a blur of emotions and adjustments. The house felt different without Laura, quieter, less tense. I'd been so focused on keeping things together for Sophie that I hadn't really processed my own feelings yet. Sophie turned to me, her eyes serious. "Maybe we should get another dog. Dad, dogs don't lie." I couldn't help but chuckle. Leave it to a kid to cut right to the heart of things. "Yeah, kiddo. Maybe we should," I said, reaching out to ruffle her hair. The idea wasn't half bad, actually. Max had been a constant source of comfort for both of us. Having another furry friend around might help fill some of the emptiness in the house. "What kind of dog would you want?" I asked, genuinely curious. Sophie's face lit up. "Can we get a big one, like a German Shepherd or a Golden Retriever?" "We'll see," I replied, not wanting to commit just yet. "We'd need to do some research first. Make sure we can handle the responsibility." Sophie nodded, her expression turning thoughtful. "Dad, are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on her well-being that I hadn't considered how I was coming across. "I'm getting there," I answered honestly. "It's going to take some time, but we'll be okay." She scooted closer and leaned against my side. "I'm glad you're here, Dad." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling a warmth I hadn't experienced in months. "Me too, sweetheart, me too." We sat there in comfortable silence, watching Max roll in the grass. Life wasn't perfect, far from it. But we had each other, and that was enough. Together, we would find a way to rebuild, one step at a time.